In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate the French toe for socks, which is an interesting but unusual sock toe. As with my previous sock toe videos, I'll also explain how to modify this toe to achieve the length you need for your sock. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. This is a French toe. It has some similarities to the wedge toe. You can see that this really looks like the side view of a wedge toe, but this is actually the top of the instep. If we turn it over and we look at the sole, we can see that there's two more lines of decreases. They're not right at the edge, they're a little bit in. And what's really going on is that this toe is divided up into thirds. So that means instead of 4 decreases per round like you'd have with a wedge toe, you have 6 decreases per round with the French toe. You do need a multiple of 6 stitches to work this toe. Because most socks are worked over a multiple of 4 stitches, you may need to work a setup decrease round to reduce the number of stitches down to a multiple of 6 before you begin. I'm going to show you how to do that a little later in the video. I want to first show you how this type of toe works so that when I show you how to work a setup decrease round, it'll make a little bit more sense. For this toe, the beginning of the round is at the center of the instep. In most cases, whatever sock pattern you are working, the beginning of the round is either going to, at this point, be in the middle of the sole, or it's going to be at one of these two edges. Regardless of where it is, at this edge, or in the center of the sole, to get started, you need to work in stockinette until you get to the center of the instep. So for me, my yarn is over here. If this is my instep right here, I need to work halfway across my instep in order to get to the center of the round. Okay, I am now at the beginning of the instep, and this is the point where I need to divide my round into thirds. So I have 60 stitches. That means I need 20 stitches in each third. So if you divide your stitches into thirds and you put them on 3 double-pointed needles, with the beginning of the round and the middle of the instep, starting with this needle, you've got 3 needles. You've got 1, 2, 3 needles. So your decreases are going to be worked at the beginning and end of each needle. If you're using 2 circular needles or magic loop, if you want to continue using that in order to work the toe, then you would have the first third of the stitches on one half of a magic loop needle or on one of the 2 needles for 2 circulars, and then you'd have the other 2/3 of the stitches on the second needle or on the second half of the needle, and you'd place a marker at the midpoint of those. So you'd use a marker to tell you when you were at the end of the needle. Each section of the round is worked the same. You work knit 1 and then you work an SSK, which is a left leaning decrease. The working needle is pointing to the left, which is how you know it's going to be pointing, the decrease is going to lean left. And then you work until you are 3 stitches short of the needle. So I have 3 stitches remaining. Now I'm going to work a right leaning decrease, which is a knit 2 together. The needle's pointing to the right, like that. So you have a left leaning decrease at the beginning of the needle and a right leaning decrease at the end. So the decreases are leaning toward the center of this section. And then you finish with a knit 1. Now each of these other 2 sections are going to be worked exactly the same. You're going to start with a knit 1, work your SSK, slip 2 stitches one at a time as if to knit, insert your left needle through the fronts, work them together. Knit until you have 3 stitches remaining, then you're going to knit 2 together, and then knit the last stitch. One more time for the last section of the round. knit 1, SSK, slip 2 stitches, one at a time as if to knit. Insert your left needle in front of those 2 stitches, work them together. So now I have finished my first decrease round, and now I'm going to work a plain round. So I'm going to alternate a decrease round with a plain round until I am down to 12 stitches. So I have continued alternating between decrease rounds and plain rounds, and at this point I have about 8 or 10 stitches left in each of the 3 sections. So this is where you need to think about what method you're going to be using to close the toe. So you have several choices. One is to graft the toe closed. The other is to use a 3-needle bind off. So if you're going to use the Kitchener stitch method of grafting the toe closed, you'll be doing it from with the right side of the work facing out. Then you can just continue on as you have been. But if you're planning to use the Finchley graft, which is done from the purl side, or if you're planning on using a 3-needle bind off, that's also done from the purl side. And so at this point you need to turn your work inside out because you want to do this at a point where you have a large enough hole to bring the toe up through, or bring the sock up through the opening. So you're not going to try to push the needles down through the opening. You're going to be pushing the sock up through the opening instead. And again, you need a large enough opening to do that. So then you can just push the sock up through there like this. You'll see that the yarn, the working yarn, is still connected to the needle on the right hand side. So this is the last stitch that you've worked, and this is the next stitch that you're going to need to work. So you just need to be able to read the stitches from the inside. So you have to look and see if it's time for a decrease round or a plain round as you would have before. It just is slightly trickier to see that. So you can keep continuing to work in the round in this way. But again, if you're going to be using Kitchener stitch method of grafting, you will continue with the work facing, with the right side facing out. So the final decrease round has worked like all of the others, where you knit 1, work an SSK decrease. But now you see there are no plain knit stitches available to work. There's just 3 stitches remaining, so we're going to be working a knit 2 together immediately after that SSK, and then we have our final knit stitch. So now we only have 4 stitches left on that needle, and we work the other needles the same way. So we have 12 stitches remaining, and it's time to graft. We want to graft the stitches so that 6 stitches from the instep are grafted to 6 stitches from the sole. So this is the end of the round. This is the 3rd needle, this is the 1st needle, and this is the middle needle. So the middle of that needle, of those 4 stitches, is the center of the sole, and we have 4 stitches. So we need 1 stitch at this edge added and 1 stitch at that edge added. So I can take 1 from each of these 2 needles. Take 1 from there. And take 1 from there. So I have my 6 sole stitches. So now what we need to do is get the last 3 stitches of the round and the first 3 stitches of the round on the same needle. But we also need to get the working yarn over to the edge. So what we're going to do is knit the first 3 stitches of the round using that last needle and knitting those 3 stitches. So now we have the 6 stitches for the instep with the band that will sit on top of the foot centered in the middle, and then we have the 6 sole stitches there, and now we can graft the stitches together. Or if you've turned your work inside out, you can do a 3-needle bind off or the Finchley graft. If the number of stitches you have on your needles before you start working your toe is not a multiple of 6, then you'll need to work a setup round of decreases. So you may need to work 2 decreases, or you may need to work 4 decreases depending on what stitch count you have and what stitch count you need. So let's say you have 68 stitches, but you need 66 stitches. When you start the toe, the multiple of 6 you're going to have is 66. That means each of these needles is going to have 22 stitches. So this is the beginning of the round. So what you want to do is you want to add those 2 stitches to the first needle and the last needle. So you will have one here and one here. And when you work your decrease setup round, you're going to work a decrease at the beginning of the round. So you'll do a knit 1 and then you'll do your SSK. Then you're just going to knit in stockinette all the way around until you get to the end of the last needle, right before the end of the round. And then you're going to work your knit 2 together, and then you're going to work your plain stitch. And what you will have done there is done a set of decreases for this center band that goes up the front of the instep. That's if you just need to decrease 2 stitches. Let's say you have 64 stitches and you need to get down to 60 stitches. That means the number of stitches you need on each needle is going to be 20 when you actually start working the toe for real. The way you want to deal with the extra 4 stitches is once again on the first and last needle you want to add 1 stitch, but on this second needle you want to add 2 stitches. The way that you work your setup decrease round is that you knit all the way until you get to the last 3 stitches of the first needle, and then you work your knit 2 together and your knit 1. And then on the second needle, you work it like a regular decrease round. So you're going to be working a knit 1, an SSK, then you're going to knit to the last 3 stitches, you're going to do your knit 2 together and your knit 1. And then on this needle, you're going to do knit 1, SSK, and then you will knit to the end. So in this case, you are working your decreases here. And what you're doing is you're doing the decreases for these 2 bands instead of for this one. So this is going to line up all of the subsequent decreases in the same place that the first ones have been established. So if you need to modify this toe in some way, maybe you need to make it a little bit longer or quite a bit longer, possibly even a little shorter, but it's a pretty short toe. So that is less likely unless you are starting with a lot of stitches. So I've shown these 2 feet in previous toe videos. These are the feet of 2 of my friends, one of whom has toes that are pretty similar in length. At least these 3 toes are. And some people have toes that are almost all the same length. And so they need actually a pretty short toe for their sock. You want to start your decreases at the point where your foot actually begins to get narrower. And that is going to be different landmarks for different people. For my friend Rosemary, the base of her big toe, but where it separates to her second toe, and the end of the ball of her foot and the top of her smallest toe are all at about the same place. But for my friend Helen, her small toe ends quite a bit before her big toe separates from her second toe. So her toe needs to be quite a bit longer. So you decide how long you actually want your toe to be. You can measure that length on your actual foot of your sock and see how many rounds that is so that you know how many rounds long you want your toe to be. Or you can use your row gauge and multiply it by the actual number of inches you need. If you need 2.5 inches and you get 11 rounds per inch, you could multiply that out. So let's say we need 20 rounds for our toe based on how long our toe needs to be. Let's look at how many rounds long the toe is actually going to be if we use the standard instructions, and then let's look at how we can modify to get the actual length that we need. So the French toe always results with 12 stitches at the end. So if our multiple of 6 was 60 stitches that we started with at the beginning of the toe, we are only going to end up with 12 no matter what. That means we will have eliminated 48 stitches. And we eliminate them 6 stitches at a time. So 48 divided by 6 is equal to 8 decrease rounds. We work a plain round after every decrease round except the final decrease round. So that means we have 7 plain rounds. If we had to work any setup rounds before we got to 60, then we are going to add 2 to that. So in this case, maybe we have 17 rounds altogether, but we need 20. So we're going to add those rounds after each of the first decrease rounds. So if we have our setup rounds, and then we have a plain round, and then we have our decrease 1 plain, decrease 2 plain, etc. The 3 extra rounds that we're going to work are going to be, you could add an extra one after your setup round if you wanted to, and then you could add the next 2 after each of these plain rounds here. So you're going to add them at the beginning of the toe and not at the end. So that would be how you could get your 20 rounds that you need for your toe. The French toe is a nice compromise between the slower decrease rate of the wedge toe and the speedy decrease rate of the round toe. Any of these toes can be modified to a specific length, but depending on the shape of your toes, you may find that one type of toe suits your foot shape better than another. Experiment with different toes to see which one you like best. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.